Open fairy tale world, romance, atmosphere, travel and exploration. The best virtual fantasy game that will allow you to discover another reality. Welcome to Chrono Life, VR game. Chuck in knight armor sends a noob far away from here. The girl apologized and told him that they do not accept amateurs into their team. A small guy, picking his nose, noted the horror of the outfit, who had not reached level 11. Chuck found himself standing alone in the crowd. He clenched his teeth behind his lips and moaned. Chuck could not stand it and said out loud his dissatisfaction with the situation. It was clear and calm on the street of the town. The guy shouted his dissatisfaction with the game. He stood with some kind of sword in his hands and complained about the bad loot he had just received. A group of players stood nearby, watching his failures. One of the participants suggested that Chuck was angry because he was not taken into the team. The guy kept screaming, barely holding back tears and claiming that he spent a lot of money on this weapon. He claimed that he spent a lot of gold on it while some girl was looking at him. She tried to talk to him but hesitated. The girl apologized for bothering her and looked at the guy. She was holding a small staff with a heart on the end. Chuck became embarrassed, stopped whining and asked what the stranger wanted from him. The girl happily offered him to join her team. Chuck's face broke out in sweat because he did not expect such an offer from a stranger. He began to praise the game, thanks to which he met her. In the forest, the light fell at an angle, breaking through the branches of the trees. Chuck and the girl were walking along the path and talking. The guy remembered that yesterday his parents gave him some money, most of which he invested in gold. The girl admired the guy's persistence and asked how long he had been leveling up here. The boy answered sheepishly that the stranger would be very surprised to hear the number. He began to tell how at first he bought all the beginner's sets for 55,001, which was enough for him. He pulled out his sword and bragged about the loot he had gotten. The girl was happy for him and said that he looked like a knight. The boy was defeated by his own embarrassment and shame. He imagined them walking along the path to the castle, how he kissed her against the backdrop of rose flowers, how he gave her a bouquet and proposed to her, how two paintings of him and his beloved were hanging on the wall. Chuck imagined how they had children. He accidentally turned to the girl and asked what they would name their daughter. The stranger ignored the question and stopped in place. The girl noticed that they had arrived at the place. The guys were standing on a small clearing in the middle of the forest against the backdrop of a hill. The boy did not understand where they had come and asked what was special about this place. The girl does not let him finish speaking and pierces his body with her staff. The guy's blood began to pour out of his mouth and his lives decreased slightly. The guy falls to the ground with a crash. He looks at the stranger in surprise with an uncomprehending expression and asks what she is doing. A pool of blood flows out from under him. Chuck does not understand why he was thrown like that and deprived of part of his lives. He assumed that the girl needed his new sword. The stranger became embarrassed and said that she did not need his junk and allowed him to keep it. Chuck looked at her warily, expecting something bad. The girl continued to tell that she took him into the thicket of the forest to kill him from prying eyes. The guy, confused, asked what about her offer to go to the team with her. The stranger laughed and said that she lied because she did not need a newbie like him. She called him a poor loser, to which Chuck had no strength left to say anything against her words. The girl continued to mock the guy and call him a bum in real life if he even scrapes the bottom in the game. She offered him to buy an advanced beginner's set with the next handout from his parents so that he would be at least a little taller and more decent than in real life. The guy thought about it. He continued to sit and regret because according to the stranger, his parents are poor if he can only afford beginner's sets. He clenched his teeth behind his lips. Chuck rose to one knee and stood up, pressing his hand to his heart. He demanded that the stranger stop. The guy said that this arrogant girl had crossed all boundaries. After his words, the girl cut his body into two halves, leaving his feet on the ground. She clearly did not like the words spoken to her, and she went into a rage. The guy fell to the ground, splashing blood from his mouth. He landed next to the second part of the body. By killing the guy, the girl completed the task and began the process of moving to the hidden class. She stood facing away from the scene of the murder. Her hair began to flutter in the wind. The stranger turned out to be the center of a gathering of many blue pixels. The texture absorbed her while she stood still. When the pixels disappeared, her clothes changed. The girl gained wings and flew up. Her clothes became aristocratic, and a large ruby hung on her neck. The voice announced that the girl had moved to the hidden class goddess of life. She was pleased with herself. The girl said that she had long been waiting for her 1,000 victims to come. She raised the staff with wings on the end up. The stranger stretched. She stepped on the defeated Chuck and walked away. The girl said that she only had the main quest left, leaving the guy behind. He was bleeding and could not do anything. That day, he learned something. The terrible secret of this game was revealed to him. He closed his eyes and accepted his death. The law of the jungle is in effect in this game. With these words, Chuck's character died. In the clear city where Chuck had once been, players were standing in the square. In one of the corners there were boxes and barrels with provisions. A notification on a red sign let the guy know that he had lost most of his experience and would be reborn in a safe place this time. The guy spawned in a passage not far from the square. There were no signs of life on his face while he was being notified of the full revival of his character. He remembered the words of a stranger who called him a pauper and said that in real life he would be afraid to even approach her. The guy was not at all happy with this arrangement. He remembered the boy in armor who sent him away from their company. He remembered a smaller boy who did not recognize his outfit as normal. The guy stood in the underpass all alone with his thoughts. He screamed at the whole street. He took a hammer from his belt. Chuck picked up the craftsman's hammer, which could improve his equipment by 1 unit. He remembered his level 3 sword. The guy swung the hammer. He hit the sword with fury, creating a shockwave at the place of its use. The guy clenched his teeth and pressed the sword even harder. He saw this as the fastest way to become stronger and more honorable. A red plate notified the guy that he had failed to improve his equipment, and it was subject to breakage. He remembered the instructions for the hammer, which should improve equipment, not break it. Chuck was at a loss. He saw a level 5 iron glove. Having hit it, the guy again formed a shockwave after use. The glove lay in several bent and broken parts while the announcer notified about the equipment's breakage. The guy screamed into the sky in anger. When he broke one part of the set, all the items were broken and lying on the ground. Chuck came to terms with his loss. He had lost the entire set after losing a part of it. The player bent down to the ground and cried, saying that the game was terrible. A wooden club fell to the ground next to him, making a noise. It was a beginner's stick, which by all accounts was almost useless. The guy was confused when he saw the club. A small boy came up to him and said hello. The guy did not understand what kind of character this was. Another player jumped up and down and joyfully pointed at the club, prompting Chuck to think that it was he who gave it to him. Really, someone noticed him and helped him. He continued to look at the boy and more found confirmation of his words. Apparently, the boy saw Chuck on the street in his underwear and felt sorry for him. The guy continued to sit on the road with a craftsman's hammer in his hand, examining the club. He still decided to accept the gift. With a blow of the hammer on the club, mana of improvement was formed. A voice informed the player that his wooden club had been upgraded by 1 level. Chuck hit the weapon again. The club had been upgraded by 2 levels. The guy was disappointed with his luck in such useless moments. He continued to hit the club with the hammer. After numerous hits and notifications, Chuck stopped. The guy looked at the level and damage of the club and was quite surprised. He continued to hit the weapon, expecting it to break soon due to the increasing chance of this. Chuck continued to hit his purchase many more times. The roar of the hammer was heard throughout the area. It was getting dark in the town, sunset was approaching. Tired, Chuck picked up the hammer. You could tell from the guy's face that he had been hitting the club for the rest of the day. His teeth were clenched from fatigue and pain. The guy reluctantly hit the craftsman's hammer again. A notification sounded about upgrading the item. Chuck was very tired as the announcer congratulated him on his success. He was informed that he had upgraded the beginner's club to the maximum level 99. The guy took the club and stood up. He was amazed at his luck, talking about upgrading by 99 levels. Chuck could not believe his eyes, because after each hit the probability of breakage only increases. He wanted to throw the weapon on the ground, when suddenly, the club began to spin at high speed. Chuck barely managed to catch it. The end of the weapon touched the ground. The guy felt an earthquake comparable to the apocalypse, accompanied by fire. A huge destructive wave passed through the entire city and went beyond its borders, moving further and further away from the guy. The wave engulfed the entire planet. The earth began to crack and break under its own gravity, sending streams of energy into space. Chuck sat on the road, holding a baton in his hands. His face was horrified and shocked by what he saw. People around him began to run away and report wounded. Players did not understand what was happening and how to protect themselves from the next wave. Players running past Chuck wondered if some kind of event had happened and if there were any warnings at all. Chuck continued to be in complete shock from what he had done and looked at the passers-by. The guy looked into the distance and thought about the continent split in two. That day at sunset, Chuck became a new record holder in VR games. The guy kept receiving notifications about killing players and increasing his reputation on the server. The Guinness record was for the largest number of players killed with one blow. Chuck was surrounded by notifications about killing players. The final number of killed was 850,617 with one blow. Chuck was tired of constant notifications about increasing reputation in front of his nose. The guy stood up proudly from the ground. He remembered the stranger who insulted his parents and himself. Chuck had a perfect plan in his head. He remembered the moment of his death and described it as the price for knowledge. He had learned the essence of this game. Only the law of the jungle works in it. Memories of rejection when joining teams kept flashing before his eyes. He sat on the ground with a smile on his face. Chuck looked at his level 99 club. The guy decided that it was his turn to teach a lesson to those who did not respect him. Chuck thinks that in real life he is a loser. The guy is disappointed in himself and his appearance. He describes his level in game terminology as Bronze 4. The sun rose over the gaming town again. The guy is walking along a stone road in a cloak. Chuck is holding a level 99 rookie club in his hand. He is planning something. The guy glanced at a passing thug with a high level and drew his attention to himself. The bully was furious at Chuck's impudence. He grabbed the guy by the cloak and pulled him towards him. The man continued to threaten the guy while his wife asked him not to touch the wretched. The bully showed Chuck to his lover and said that he was already scared. Here the guy was completely different. He insulted the bully and called his face like a pig, which caused shock from the opponent's impudence. The bully approached the guy with threats and asked for his words as he lightly hit him on the head with a stick. The bully looked at the courage. He was ready to tear Chuck apart because of his impudence and break his worthless stick when suddenly, the next blow with the stick was so strong that the bully could not withstand its energy on himself. The man's head was covered in yellow mana. The glow spread for many kilometers ahead. The bully's beloved was shocked by what she saw and did not understand what to do. The guy stood in front of her with a club in his hand and looked menacingly. He lowered his hand with the weapon along his body. Here he was invincible. Chuck smiled. He felt like the main hero of this world. He proudly looked forward, feeling his power over everyone. The irritating notification about the decreasing durability of the club infuriated him. It turned out that the starting weapon, despite its level, had only 5 units of durability. The guy miraculously did not break the club, which was incredibly surprising. Chuck felt invincible. The sun's rays occasionally broke through the thick clouds, blinding the area. The guy was sitting on a narrow street and looking at the club lying on the ground. He was very scared. The announcer warned about the extremely low durability of the starting weapon and offered to fix it. Chuck sat in confusion and continued to think. Suddenly, the guy accidentally lost his balance and fell backwards. Chuck was upset that the stick was almost broken after 2 blows. He continued to lie there and not get up from the ground, thinking. His face was unhappy with the sudden turn. The guy decided that he was in a hopeless situation. Chuck decided to beat up those who laughed at him when he was weak, and he wanted to take revenge on the lying girl who killed him for her own benefit. Chuck looked at the clouds. He clenched his teeth and got down to business. The guy got up from the ground and picked up the stick, looking around where he was. He muttered something under his breath. Chuck realized that he only had 3 blows for everything. The Valley of the Dead was full of skulls and bones. He stepped on a skull with his foot, which crunched loudly under his weight. The guy had been walking on skulls for a long time. His face was full of fatigue. The guy stopped to catch his breath and rest. Suddenly, the skulls began to shake and roll over each other, releasing something large from under them. At first, the guy did not understand what it was. Chuck realized that he was in the right place. A giant cloud of smoke rose up behind the large stone peaks. From inside, something was looking at the guy with purple eyes. It turned out to be a dragon, which immediately headed towards Chuck, breaking bones in its path. 2 heads roared at each other. The guy continued to look at them without emotion. It was the main boss of the game, the 2-headed dragon Urus. The creature was approaching him, claiming that he had crossed the line of the dead. The dragon continued to approach the hero, talking about the line between life and death. The creature said that Chuck was a fool because he would experience eternal torment. When suddenly the dragon's head was covered in yellow mana from the guy's club. The first head was torn from its base. The second head looked in shock at the remainder of the neck. Chuck swung his club. He thought that if he had 3 hits left. He pointed the club at the second head. There were 2 units of durability left. Chuck swung the stick, waiting for the outcome. He wanted to kill the strongest boss in the game, using all the durability of the club. The dragon looked at the column of energy coming from ahead. The surviving head asked Chuck to stop his decision. The guy asked what he wanted. The dragon continued to assure the guy that he needed to tell him something. The creature said that it was forced to pronounce offensive phrases according to the script to seem more serious. The head asked to stop and not to make such a choice because of an error. Dracoy asked the guy who he was. Chuck swung the club and said that it did not matter, to which he asked to wait. The guy did not listen to the head and struck. A large crack of energy began to move towards the dragon. Mana seriously injured the dragon and pushed it far back. The creature fell dead behind the ridges of bones. It continued to spit blood and bleed. Suddenly, the head turned into a human one. Chuck said that it had 1 hit on it. The guy said that he could not do anything about the durability of the weapon, so he would have to use it. The dragon interrupted the guy's thoughts. The creature offered to help with the weapon's durability. Chuck was about to swing, but he was interested in the offer. The guy asked the dragon what was needed for this. A notification panel appeared in front of Chuck's face. The sign said that the 2-headed dragon wanted to make a pact and give the guy his soul. Chuck wondered whether to accept the task. The dragon asked him if he had ever heard of a great sword. The guy did not know what an ego sword was and asked the boss. The dragon said that it would take a long time to explain how this sword works, to which he asked for a simpler explanation. The creature offered to inhabit his weapon and live inside as a spirit. A weapon evolves into an ego sword when it gains a soul. The guy was shocked when he heard about the infinite durability of such a weapon. The monster began to assure Chuck that the ego sword is the most powerful weapon in the game, to which the guy smirked. He shouted into the sky, causing confusion in his opponent. The dragon asked if everything was okay with the guy. He asked if his opponent agreed to the deal, to which Chuck laughed. The guy said that he had already changed his mind about revenge, but the game seemed to force him to do it. The dragon did not know what to expect from a maddened opponent. The guy agreed to the quest and accepted it. A large energy circle appeared around Chuck. The dragon approached the sphere and froze. Its wings began to evaporate into particles. A notification informed the guy that the boss's physical body had disappeared. The news followed about the dragon settling in the guy's weapon as a soul. Chuck's wooden club was covered in a purple aura and turned into an ego class. The weapon's durability was infinite. Something high in the sky caught the guy's attention. Something was moving towards Chuck. These were souls. The creatures said that their master was thirsty for revenge. Eurus was thirsty for revenge. The guy stood and looked at the approaching souls, shouting the word revenge in one voice. The creatures rose like a mountain above the ground and began to move towards the guy. This was the army of Eurus. Chuck said that he agreed to take revenge. He imagined the very girl who killed him in front of his head and raised his weapon up. An energy barrier flashed across the entire earth. The sun was still shining brightly. In the town, players began to gather near the wall with Chuck's photo on it. The players' attention was drawn to a man standing near the wall. The knight said that this scoundrel killed 800,000 people in a day, and a reward was placed on his head. The man continued to claim that this was the biggest murder in the history of the game. Bounty notices were posted all over the city. They were distributed in all 12 kingdoms of the game. The knight shouted a price of 1 trillion gold for the guy's head. The players were amazed at such a ransom reward. An entire army of people in golden armor walked down the street. The residents parted to the sides, letting them go ahead. The players were shocked. They saw the royal guard right on the streets of the kingdom. They paid attention to their coats of arms. Voices were heard from the crowd pointing to a person walking in front of the entire army. It was the leader of the guild, Clara. Suddenly, from the other side, the players saw knights in red cloaks with white crosses. The residents began to comment on the elite unit led by Jake. The attention of the public was drawn to the girl standing in front of the army of magicians. The crowd said that her name was Sophie, and she was the strongest mage in the royal family and also the head of the mage guild. The players saw the thieves guild led by their leader Nate. A knight in the line knocked his hand on his helmet. He was holding a large flag in his hand. The man raised the flag with the shield emblem. The rest of the warriors of this unit did the same. They were led by the king of the palace of Arden Lucas. The players were amazed by such a sight on the ordinary streets of the kingdom. After all, the 5 most powerful guilds in the world had gathered here with one goal. Their flags towered over the ranks of fighters. This was the first ever alliance of the strongest guilds in the game. Lucas attracted everyone's attention with his speech. The guy declared total war. All the soldiers in the line stood motionless and listened to the order. Lucas declared war on a baton of level 99, ego class and infinite durability. The guy walked along the road and examined his weapon. He was pleased with this state of affairs. The guy was struck by hysterical laughter and a thirst for revenge. A small creature crawled out of the club and loudly greeted the owner, which caused fear and confusion in him. Chuck did not know what it was that was sticking out of the club in the shape of a head. The creature said that it was a 2-headed dragon Eurus. The guy was surprised by what he saw. He remembered how he fought a giant dragon that day, to which the head confirmed the guy's guess. The creature broke away from the club and flew higher, telling about how its soul had entered the weapon. The dragon continued to say that this was a normal phenomenon for an ego-class weapon, while the guy poked his finger at it and was touched. Chuck asked where the creature's other head had gone, because it was 2-headed. The soul shuddered from such a question. The creature remembered that it really did have another head at one time. The dragon was disappointed and upset that its second head was missing. A yellowed piece of paper fell to the ground between the heroes. Chuck picked it up, anticipating what it said. He saw his face and 1,000,000,000,000 for his head. The guy was surprised when he saw it. More leaflets rained down from the sky, shocking the heroes. Chuck stood with the club on his shoulder and looked at the street. On every corner and in every alleyway, leaflets with his face and the ransom amount were pasted up. They were everywhere. The dragon screamed in surprise at what he saw. The soul began to praise the guy and shower him with compliments about such a major murder. The dragon continued to tell him that the reward would be real, because it was royal. Chuck took a bite of meat and asked if the game characters should even know about the existence of the player's world. The dragon nervously stated that now he was in the afterlife and could be headstrong. The soul wondered what the guy would do next, since all the players would be hunting him for days. The dragon suggested dealing with all of humanity right now. Chuck remembered the lethal force of his weapon when he hit the ground and cut through the continent. The guy looked at the road strewn with reward flyers again. He thought for a moment and stopped chewing. Chuck looked at his face on the flyer again. The guy felt like a celebrity and admitted that it was cool. He took another bite of chicken and said that in this case he would act according to the LPS principle. The dragon was confused by the new words and asked what it meant. Chuck explained that it was a principle when someone dangerous and powerful pretends to be a harmless loser. The dragon asked disappointedly why the guy needed such an attitude from those around him, who would not notice him. Chuck admitted that his plan was funny. He once again talked about the coolness of the fact that no one would suspect a loser of superpowers. Chuck decided to say something else, but an arrow flew into his back. The dragon was shocked by what he saw. The arrow pierced the guy through and through, causing him to fall. Blood gushed from his mouth. Chuck fell to the ground dead, leaving the dragon alone with his thoughts. The soul tried to reach the guy. The quiver of arrows sparkled in the distance. The bow from which the arrow was fired was no less attractive. Lucas watched his archer hit the target. Hundreds of people in armor went towards the guy. They were advancing from all sides. Chuck lay on the ground and tried to cope with the arrow that had hit him. Thousands of soldiers surrounded the square, giving him no chance to escape. Lucas introduced himself to Chuck with a shout. He ordered his men to capture and imprison the guy who killed 800,000 people. The soldiers unanimously declared that they accepted the order. Eurus asked his master if he was alive. He said that these people, although weak individually, pose a great danger together. Chuck knelt down, spitting blood from his mouth. The arrow continued to suck all the strength out of the boy. He stood up on two legs with difficulty. The archers shouted that Chuck was up. Lucas ordered not to spare the boy. The warriors ran to attack. Eurus called out to his master. Chuck said that he had changed his mind. The boy forcibly pulled the arrow out of his body. He threw it on the road in front of the approaching soldiers. Chuck took a firm grip on the club. He said that the principle of peaceful LPS was definitely not created for his situation. The boy's eyes lit up, and he screamed with rage. Chuck struck the club, and a yellow light spread across the entire area. The archers were confused by what they saw. A huge explosion occurred on the entire planet. The soldiers were defeated and lay in pieces on the road. Lucas survived the explosion and tried to come to his senses. The guy was surprised by such a crushing force from one blow. His entire legion fell on the site where the city used to be. The guy was shocked by what he saw. The capital of his kingdom was destroyed by a large explosion. Chuck proudly walked up to the shooter. Lucas did not know how to act in front of such a powerful weapon. In front of him stood a guy in a cloak and a club at the ready. Lucas put his hand in his bosom and began to look for something. He took out a summoning crystal from his pocket, allowing him to call any number of players for help at a time. The guy broke the crystal, achieving radiation. A blue sphere surrounded Lucas. Many of the same spheres began to appear in the area. The guy shouted an order to all members of the United Forces Guild to come to his aid. Mass teleportation. Many elite warriors began to teleport to the place of the spheres. Jake and his army stood behind the warriors. Chuck stood surrounded by a large number of reinforcements. Many warriors were looking at the boy with fury, waiting for the command. The forces surrounded Chuck, leaving him no hope of escape. The Guild of United Forces is a legion of players, ready to do any order given by their commander. That's 3 million real people playing right now and wanting to kill him. They were all teleported to one place. Lucas stood up and pointed at the boy. He shouted to get the legion's attention. The boy ordered to attack Chuck at any cost. Millions of soldiers ran towards the boy. Chuck stood still, wondering what to do. He grabbed a club and slammed it on the ground. A huge crack appeared from the impact and spread throughout the legion, killing thousands of soldiers. The leaders of all the groups were shocked by such power. Eurus was also surprised by the power of an ordinary stick. Chuck swung his weapon again. He hit an approaching warrior. Another line of energy spread throughout the legion. The dragon looked at what was happening, confused. He remembered his words about the strength of warriors together. Eurus said offendedly that this was natural. After all, even the boss dragon could not defeat the entire guild at once. No one could defeat such elite warriors of the world without calling on their own army. The dragon decided that it was better to get out of here. Eurus realized that he had misunderstood the guy at the time. Millions of warriors continued to advance. Jake ordered to act to kill and took part in the battle himself. He jumped high into the air with a couple of his elite soldiers and swung at the guy. 4 of the strongest warriors flew towards Chuck. The guy swung his club, smiling. With one blow, he scattered the elite unit in different directions. A huge wave of energy swept through the legion. Sophie was nearby and decided to support her colleagues. She called on her strongest mages to confront Chuck. The guy noticed them on the horizon. A large blue magic circle began to descend on his head. Sophie cast an ancient spell of destruction magic. The circle of energy began to spin and emit light. Chuck was amazed at what he saw. A powerful column of energy began to emerge from the sphere. The guy noted that this spell sounded very cool. He decided that he needed to come up with some spells for his attacks too. Chuck swung his club to meet the magic. A huge column of energy burst out, breaking through the Earth's atmosphere. A large hole formed in Sophie's magic circle. The sphere began to crack. In the end, it simply broke and its fragments fell to the ground. The girl was furious when she realized that Chuck interrupted her greatest spell. Sophie ordered the royal magicians to listen to her command. The girl hesitated when she saw that the guy raised the stick up. Chuck furiously shouted the spell strike. A large wave of energy dispersed towards the magicians. Sophie and her subordinates flew apart. Chuck thought that this battle was not as spectacular as he would have liked. A million-strong guild was routed without a chance. Lucas was kneeling in despair. He was covered in sweat and did not understand what had happened. The guy did not believe his eyes and denied what was happening. His legs were lying next to him when Chuck approached him with a club at the ready. The guy said that he did not want to kill his opponent because he just lost his temper because of him. Lucas plaintively asked the reason for his refusal. Chuck asked happily what could be unclear. He said that Lucas shot him with a bow. The guy was sitting on the ground and was waiting for something. Chuck swung his club and hit Lucas in the face with it. As expected, this battle was on everyone's lips that day. Millions of swords were stuck in the ground at the site of the battle. This news was spread not only among players of this game, but also among people who are not interested in VR games at all. Chuck stood with a club in his hand at the battle site. He pulled the weapon forward and thought. Eurus got out of the weapon while the guy was wondering where it had gone. A woman's shoe stepped on the ground. Chuck turned to look at the one who dared to approach him. The girl was walking towards him. The guy looked back and asked if anyone was still alive. He expressed his condolences, but saw a familiar face. In front of him stood the image of the stranger who had deceived him. They were standing opposite each other among the dead bodies. But it was the same girl. Chuck was in a stupor. He was still angry at her and waiting for revenge. Who would have known? The girl was standing opposite. She greeted the guy, saying that she had not seen him for a long time. Chuck could not even imagine that they would meet here. The sun was setting over the endless expanse of the battlefield, strewn with the bodies of 3 million players. There were countless swords, spears, and staffs scattered around this land. The stranger stood in front of Chuck and looked into his eyes. After all, the guy met that mysterious girl who killed him. He was furious that he met her at such a moment. Chuck thought that this meeting could be fateful for him. The guy stood motionless and looked at the stranger. He remembered the girl's words before he had yet to gain superpowers. Chuck clenched the club in his hand. He gritted his teeth and could not understand. The guy looked at his opponent again with a grin. He was overcome with laughter for some unknown reason. The girl stood in front of Chuck, clenching her hands in a lock. The young people stood and looked at each other, holding weapons in their hands. The stranger asked the guy how he was doing. She said that their meeting was the will of fate, that they met under such circumstances. Chuck said that it was not fate, but a deliberate search for a player with the intention of killing him. The stranger chuckled. The girl asked why he thought so of her. The guy looked at her menacingly. Chuck said that he would split her skull right now, but he needed to find out something through conversation. He asked the girl why her hair color had changed, which caused confusion in his opponent. The stranger laughed and was glad that he noticed it. She said that she had sacrificed him back then in order to enter a new hidden class, the Goddess of Life. The guy remembered how the girl had rejoiced at the thousands of players killed back then. She stretched, not paying attention to the guy who had died then. The stranger said that when she switched to another class, she had changed her hair color. Chuck continued to look menacingly at the girl. He was ready to strike. The guy extended his club forward. Chuck asked her why, after 1,000 murders, she had become the goddess of life and not the goddess of death. The girl continued to stand still and look at her opponent. She noticed the funny turn of events and the inconsistency. Chuck angrily declared that it was not funny. The guy hit the ground with his club, creating a large yellow crack, but the girl jumped and dodged the attack. Chuck declared that he did not need anything more from the girl, and he wanted her to be the victim this time. The stranger was surprised by how quickly the guy's mood changed. A huge yellow explosion thundered across the battlefield. Chuck stood in front of a large crater. He looked up and got angry. The girl again avoided the attack and expressed her opinion about the guy's helplessness. She stated that she wanted to talk to him more. Chuck turned around and swung his club again. After another blow, the guy can't take it anymore. A huge crack hit the battlefield. Eurus rejoices at a direct hit on the target. The dragon began to praise the guy and instill confidence in him after what he saw. Chuck declared that he knew how good he was. The silhouette of the stranger appeared from the smoke again, which shocked the guy. Chuck was perplexed by what he saw. The girl was standing at the bottom of the funnel as if nothing had happened. She noted that Chuck had become much stronger since their last meeting. The stranger said that he could not defeat her with such a weapon. Eurus grabbed Chuck's face and began to nervously repeat that she had survived. The guy was perplexed at this point. The girl approached him again. Eurus was very scared by the approach of such a strong opponent. He realized that the girl could see him. The dragon was perplexed because no one except his master could see him in this game. Chuck unhooked Eurus and said that this was a very strange situation. The guy said that he saw how he hit the girl, but there was not a scratch on her. The stranger said that she was the goddess of life and she could not be defeated so easily. The girl said that a mere mortal would not have the chance. The guy happily noticed something. He said he was angry. Chuck rushed towards the girl. The guy was running at a very high speed towards the standing stranger. For some reason, her face was full of confidence. She didn't even consider it necessary to open her eyes with her hair. Chuck hit the stranger with his club. The blow was extremely powerful. A huge column of yellow energy rose up. Chuck struck a few more blows in the hope of changing something. The entire planet shook from such an amount of released energy. Eurus flew in the air and watched the guy. The dragon was afraid that at this rate his master would simply destroy the world. The girl stood there unharmed and without a scratch and asked Chuck not to bother. The stranger rose up on her wings and flew point blank to the guy. She continued to hold her height and looked at him from above. Eurus was surprised by the girl's strength. Chuck was exhausted and upset. His face was full of thirst for revenge. The girl flapped her golden wings. She put away her wings and started to float in the air without them. The girl landed on the ground. The stranger called the guy a loser like the first time and asked if he dreamed of revenge every minute of his life. The girl started walking towards Chuck, telling him to finally give in because he would never defeat her in his life. She came up to him point blank. She told Chuck this again right in his face. The guy thought desperately. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He sighed with hope and turned away from her. The guy moved his legs and turned around. Chuck decided to leave this place and just go away. The girl asked if the guy was giving up this time. The main character began to imagine how he would strike. He turned around and said that he needed to break something. Chuck rolled his cloak up to his shoulders under the girl's words that he could not kill her. He desperately declared that he was not going to kill her. He wanted to destroy the entire planet. The stranger stood in a stupor for a few seconds. She asked the guy again with bewilderment in her voice. Chuck happily declared that he might not defeat her with his own hands, but he would get rid of the entire planet. The girl stood with a menacing face and listened to him about the inevitable death when the planet was destroyed. The stranger praised Chuck for his interesting approach to solving the problem. She asked the guy if a mere mortal like him could do it. Chuck grabbed his shoulder and declared that this is why he measured his punching strength. The guy began to remember today's blows that did not completely break the planet, because they were not at full strength. The girl continued to look at Chuck as if he were an idiot. She asked if he thought about his life, which he would undoubtedly lose when the planet was destroyed. The guy stood in thought, while the stranger asked him if he was ready to die just for the sake of revenge. Chuck remembered his death from killing a girl and realized that he had gained knowledge in his life. The guy turned around and grinned in the stranger's face. He began to remember the moments when he was not accepted into the team. Chuck understood the essence of this game and laughed nervously, recalling the events that led him to this moment. He remembered that the law of the jungle was in effect in this game. Chuck asked him to listen. He was determined to teach all the players a lesson. The girl looked at the guy and listened to his complaints about other players and disrespect, claiming that this was alien to her. Chuck raised his club up and said 2 words, revenge, suicide. He looked hysterically at the girl and said that she should not have messed with someone who had nothing to lose in life. The girl stood there worried and bit her lip. She asked Chuck to stop and listen to her. The guy hit the ground with all his might with the club. Its end touched the soil and created an energy circle. A large yellow sphere rose above the people. The girl looked at the guy with horror. Eurus was also shocked by such actions of his master. Chuck was full of the idea of revenge. 6 energy waves spread across the earth, destroying it. The planet was completely covered with cracks. There was too much energy, and it began to tear apart from the inside. The planet completely heated up and began to radiate energy. At that moment, an explosion occurred. It was visible from all nearby space. A huge flash was very bright and did not inspire hope for the inhabitants of the former Earth. The green matrix code was bunched into a wave and rushed from top to bottom. The building of game capsules. The hall of VR capsules for playing VR. The man at the checkout sat and yearned for the boredom of his job. Suddenly, the guy heard swear words from the players. He looked at 2 players who were taking off their VR helmets and saying that they were thrown out of the game. The guys began to take off their helmets and reasoned that they did not even have time to reach the boss. The angry faces of the players began to blame the administrator for the problems. The guy stood up from the counter and asked to remain calm because he had nothing to do with the breakdown. One of the players asked if there could be a problem with the game servers, to which other people refused. One of the gamers attracted everyone's attention by saying that a notification had appeared on the game page. The message contained information about the temporary closure of the game servers due to a malfunction. The girls left the booths and opened their phones in confusion about the breakdown of the servers. One booth was online. Inside stood a guy, and on the door there was a sign prohibiting entry. Chuck still saw green error symbols. The in-game notification said that the synchronization process with the client identification system version 1.7 was in progress. The system began to count the number of players on the server. After a pause, the number 1 appeared. Chuck stood alone in a blue space. He was surprised by what he saw. The guy did not know where he ended up. Chuck was perplexed because he had just been in another world. His number came from somewhere outside. There was a man standing behind the guy, claiming that he had destroyed one of the most beautiful planets in the universe. Chuck walked closer to the guy and asked how bad it was. The man kept saying that it was his mother's favorite planet. Chuck looked at the guy with disbelief. He asked who he was. The interlocutor was surprised. He clenched his teeth. The guy smiled widely. His eyes were hysterically big, and his mouth was open in anticipation of retribution. The last thing the guy said was that he was a great creator. Chuck stood there with a serious look. He grinned at this. Looking at the creator, the protagonist asked if the creator had seen a girl with black hair. Taken aback, the guy asked again which girl Chuck was talking about, noting that they were alone there. A projection appeared in front of the protagonist. He read a message that there was one player on the server. Smiling, the creator asked if Chuck was a fool or pretending, adding that he had killed everyone. The protagonist was taken aback by this. The creator imagined the planet splitting and asked if anyone could survive such a large-scale explosion. He stated that there was nothing alive left. A smirk appeared on Chuck's face. The guy looked at the main character with bewilderment. Chuck started laughing loudly. He raised the stick above his head. The creator looked at the main character with surprise, who was shouting that he was happy and that was why he played online games. Looking at the stick, Chuck asked Eurus to come out, adding that he had finally gotten his revenge. He held the stick in his hand. The main character started hitting the club with his hand and calling Eurus. Grinning, the creator said that there were only 2 of them. Chuck looked at him. Looking at the main character, the guy said that this stupid beast was not there. Chuck asked with a displeased look what this meant and who the guy was, noting that there was only one player on the server. Looking at the guy, the main character asked if he was an NPC or a developer. The guy answered with a satisfied look that neither one nor the other, and he suddenly heard a crack. The guy sighed. Clutching his head, he said that interference had already started. A bright light was heard in the space. Chuck was taken aback. The guy smirked and said that it was a shame, but it was okay and it was nice to meet him. The guy held out his hands and said goodbye and asked to say hi to the furries. The surprised protagonist asked him to wait. A bright light began to spread. It illuminated the space. White light enveloped the entire space. Chuck saw a green set of numbers. He saw a message that he was kicked out of the game. We are being transferred to the gaming club. The booths were empty. Chuck's booth began to open. He was sitting on a chair. The protagonist took off his helmet. He was unhappy. Enraged, Chuck asked why that guy even showed up. Looking at the people, the protagonist asked what kind of nonsense about furries this was. The man was smoking a cigar. He got up from his chair. The stranger was walking towards Chuck. Walking towards the protagonist, the man said that he was 21 years old and had been playing Chrono Life for 3 months. Looking at the guards, the man noticed that Chuck's favorite weapon was a wooden club. Approaching the protagonist, he clarified if everything was correct. Chuck asked about furry and his thoughts. The dumbfounded protagonist answered that everything was correct and asked who he was. The man took off his glasses. He said with a serious look that he was the one who came for his club. Chuck introduced himself and noted that he was 21 years old. He remembered how people looked at him and added that he was a college student and a fan of the game Chrono Life. The dumbfounded protagonist held a sword in his hands and noted that, in fact, during the entire time of the game, he never rose above the amateur level. He raised the blade above his head. He looked at the stick and emphasized the fact that he was lucky and was able to pump an ordinary club to the maximum level and defeat all those who did not like him. He imagined many corpses. The protagonist remembered the girl and added that he defeated her too. He remembered how he hit the ground. An image of the planet splitting appeared in his head. Chuck stood in front of the guy who called himself the creator. The guy stretched out his arms and immediately disappeared. The night sky enveloped the building. A crowd of security guards stood in front of the restaurant. The sign was brightly lit. Chuck looked at the food on the table. The protagonist sat opposite the man. Looking at Chuck, the man told him to eat, noting that his old friend was a cook in this place and she cooked mind-blowingly. The protagonist was scared. He mentally asked what was going on. Sitting opposite, the man told him that when he was poor, he often came there to eat gukpub. He closed his eyes and said that it was 15 years ago and that he founded his company when Chrono Life was still in development. The protagonist was taken aback by this. Chuck asked in his mind about the game's development and the company. The dumbfounded protagonist said that this couldn't be. The man smirked and asked if he didn't understand, adding that he was the president of Chrono Life, Steve. Looking at the guards, Chuck asked if he was a mafia member and when those people in suits came into being. Steve replied that they were employees. He pointed at all the people and said that there was a character modeler, a sound engineer, and the head of marketing. Frowning, Chuck remarked that he thought they were mafia and asked why the game's president had found him then. Holding a spoon in his mouth, Steve replied that he had already told him at the computer club. Sitting across from the protagonist, he said that he had come for his nightstick. Dumbfounded, Chuck asked again. Steve closed his eyes and asked what was unclear, noting that it was normal practice for the company leader to take an item with a bug. Standing up from the table, the protagonist asked what kind of bug it was if he had upgraded the weapon himself. Steve said 3% with a serious expression. Looking at Chuck, he noted that this was the probability of a successful upgrade after the 10th time, and after the 10th time, as he understood it, this probability decreased. Steve asked seriously if the protagonist understood this. Chuck was taken aback by this. Steve imagined a lot of green zeros and assumed that this was not a bug and asked if Chuck could tell him, according to their formula, what the probability was of what he had done with the club. The protagonist placed his hands on the table. Steve closed his eyes. He declared that he would confiscate his max-level club. The night sky enveloped the building. Daylight surrounded the city. Stone columns stood in the forest. We are transferred to the front city district. The monster opened its mouth. Its eyes glowed red. Gortys rushed at the crowd of people. The staff burst into flames. The girl swung the staff. She released a fiery projectile. Fiery energy enveloped Gortys. The monster began to scream loudly. Grinning, the guy said that it was cool and asked for more. Yellow mana emanated from the girl. She swung her fist. The stranger rushed at the monster. The dumbfounded guy asked where she was going alone. The girl pounced on the Gortys' muzzle. The monster threw her off himself. The second girl watched her. She looked at her with a surprised look. The girl fell to the ground. The protagonist watched them from a height. He sat on a hill and listened to the screams of the guys. His face was serious. He sighed. Looking at the sky, Chuck asked what he should do now. Eurus chewed meat. Sitting behind the protagonist, he asked what he would do now. Chuck's face was sad. He lowered his head. The protagonist looked at his club. He stared at it. He remembered the restaurant sign glowing. Steve was sitting across from him and saying he was confiscating his club. Chuck frowned at that. He noted that he had been instructed to say that at the company. The protagonist was taken aback by that. Steve smiled and noted that he thought it was unfair to do that. Surprised, Chuck asked if that was true. Putting down his spoon, Steve said that he had done his research and that his club was not a bug at all. Sitting at the table, Steve said that he had decided he would not interfere and would leave the protagonist alone. Steve imagined a huge dragon, human corpses, and a planet splitting. He noted that even though Chuck had killed the strongest monster, 3 million users, and destroyed the planet, he was a user and had the right to free action. Steve began mixing the two dishes. Surprised, Chuck watched him. Steve smirked and said that the protagonist could add K-Kadug to his kugpub and that it was his choice. Chuck looked at the food in surprise. He took the plate. The protagonist was holding the plate in his hands. Grandma hit Steve on the back of the head and screamed that he was shameless. Grandma walked away from them and screamed that Steve was rude and that she had cooked beef bone broth all night, and that he was trying to ruin it and had specially added a separate soup with K-Kadug to the menu for him. Chuck put the plate on the table. He looked at his club. The protagonist was thinking about the soup with K-Kadug with a serious expression. He was taken aback by the sudden scream. The guy pointed and asked Kate what kind of priest she was. The enraged guy asked if she knew how to behave during a team fight and why it was necessary to tank on a priest. Chuck watched them. Steve looked at his empty plate and said that he would ask Chuck for only one thing. Closing his eyes, he said that he did not know if he could say such things as a president, but Chrono Life, a good game. Folding his arms, he began to talk about freedom, romance, an open world, adding that this fantasy world has no equal. Smiling, Steve asked not to destroy it and just enjoy their stay. The protagonist was sitting on a slope. The guy spat at Kate. The saliva flew into her. He showed his finger and said that he would not go on a raid with her anymore. Leaving Kate, he said that he could not believe that Kate had the same weapon. Kate saw a message that she was kicked out of the team. Chuck looked at her. He sighed. The enraged protagonist said that the open world and romance are nonsense and survival of the fittest is the main rule. He remembered Chuck, who asked to just enjoy their stay. Swinging his stick, the protagonist declared that he would simply take everything from life as best he could, and when he wanted a heartier Keikajugi soup, he would throw some more Keikajugi in there. He delivered a powerful blow. He looked at the boys. He watched them intently. Chuck suddenly tripped. He turned around. He saw Kate screaming that this game was bad. Furious, Kate screamed that they didn't understand weapons. Looking at her hands, Kate asked if they didn't understand what a cool weapon she had. She screamed with tears in her eyes that she had spent so much gold on these brass knuckles. Chuck watched her. He remembered looking at his sword. The protagonist was surprised. An image of people looking at him appeared in his head. Chuck stared at Kate. A tearful Chuck held the sword above his head. The plot takes us some time later. Kate was upset and cried out that she didn't need any team and she would go on raids alone. She started to leave. The protagonist was watching her. He noted that he didn't know what to think. Kate heard the monsters roar and got scared. She saw the monster in front of her. A crowd of monsters surrounded her. Kate was dumbfounded. She looked at the monster's mouth. The monster's eyes were glowing red. She looked at the huge crowd. The monsters rushed at her. She stood still. Kate covered her face with her hands. The protagonist landed in front of her. He wondered why he did that. Chuck swung his stick. He used a blow from below on the crowd of monsters. There was a powerful explosion. The protagonist held the club above his head. Kate held her head with her hands. She opened her eyes. She was surprised. Chuck was standing next to her. His face was serious. Kate was dumbfounded. He looked at the grass. He held the stick on his shoulder. Chuck grinned and thought that he did it for fun. Kate was delighted. The protagonist turned to her. He stood in front of her and thought that this was a bit of epic action and that was it. The prologue was over. They looked at each other. Chuck had a smile on his face. He greeted her with a satisfied look. Kate looked at him with an embarrassed look. Standing in front of her, the protagonist asked her if she wanted to join his team. Chuck thought that now his story had truly begun. Chuck thought that now his story was beginning. Kate showed her middle finger and said that she didn't hang out with noobs. She started to walk away from the protagonist. Chuck was surprised. He noticed that this wasn't a very rosy beginning. The starry sky enveloped the city. People were riding a bus. Waiters were looking at their phones. The guy was holding onto the handrail. The girl was lying on the bed. Chuck said that the incident was an event that caught the attention of the world community. Many corpses were lying on the ground. The main character told us that this event was called the Judgment Day and the End of the World. The guy was typing something. Chuck noted that gamers all over the world discussed this incident day and night. They looked at the poster with the main character and discussed who he was. They saw a bright light and the inscription that he was the strongest in Chrono Life. The enraged man screamed that it was a lie. Frowning, he asked how he could be the strongest if he had a bugged character or a cheat. Smiling, the girl said that if 3 million players could not defeat him, then this is some kind of unreal and bad. Holding the phone, the stranger noted that it was impossible to defeat such a superior number on an ordinary, even pumped up character. Looking at the phone, the girl screamed for the cheater to be removed. People were looking at the screen and screaming that they wanted justice. They were asking Chrono Life to work. The plot tells us that everyone was waiting for the Chrono Life administration to respond. The administration sent an announcement that they were addressing all players. They wrote that they wanted to make an official statement about the incident. A satisfied man announced that someone would be banned for life. The administration wrote that there were no violations on the part of the offender. The man was taken aback by this. The administration said that the investigation established that the offender was not a cheater and his character did not contain bugs and his actions did not violate the rules of the Chrono Life world. People were taken aback by this. The sunny sky enveloped the city. The plot tells us that this is how the issue was settled. The guy turned around and asked if his friend had heard the news. The girls were discussing how the Chrono Life server was disabled that time due to the actions of that user. People on the street were discussing how the guy killed millions of players with one blow. They looked at the posters and said that it was impossible to make out the poster because of the hood. They were closely examining his face. Chuck walked with a satisfied face. He followed Kate. She was embarrassed. The protagonist closed his eyes. Turning around, Kate asked why he was following her. Chuck smiled and replied that they should be on the raid together. Furious, Kate asked when she agreed, noting that she would never go on a raid with some homeless exhibitionist. The protagonist pointed at himself and asked if she was talking about him. Chuck began to cover himself, and Kate screamed that he was wearing only his underwear under his cloak and was still fighting with the stick. She began to leave and said that she did not play with newbies. He looked after her and said that he saved her from monsters. Stunned, Eurus said that he saw what happened and when Chuck killed monsters, she closed her eyes in fear and saw nothing. The protagonist held the stick above her head. Kate held her head in her hands. Putting his hand to her chin, Chuck noted that she did not even realize how strong he was. The protagonist looked at Kate. Grinning, Chuck remembered that he had to hide his strength. The protagonist ran after her and tried to call out to her. He enthusiastically asked to teach him. Surprised, Kate asked again. Holding the back of his head, Chuck said that he had only recently started playing and asked to teach him. Kate was inspired by this. She remembered how the guy spat at her and showed her the finger. Confused, Kate asked if she was the sensei. Surprised, Eurus asked what his master was doing. The protagonist replied that he was pretending to be a noob and needed to pretend to be weak. Stunned, Eurus said that this was the loser strategy he was talking about. Chuck flew away from Kate's scream. With a smile on her face, she said that she was embarrassed and the sensei really does teach noobs how to play, so she doesn't mind. Chuck saw a message that Kate was inviting him to her team. Pleased, Kate noted that she could be his teacher maybe just once. The protagonist saw her characteristics. They came to the cave. Kate rushed into battle. She swung her fist. She hit a huge hare. The hare started spitting blood. He fell to the ground. The monster rushed at her from behind. Kate dodged it. She exhaled. Kate did a somersault in the air. The hare was dumbfounded. She swung her leg. She used a diving dragon kick and hit the monster. The beasts were scared. They started to come at her in a crowd. Kate got into a fighting stance. Smiling, Kate declared that she was a sensei. Chuck watched the fight from the side. He noted with satisfaction that she fought well. Sitting by the rock, the protagonist emphasized that even when the enemy is low level, it is better not to allow yourself to be surrounded. Surprised, Eurus asked her not to worry, noting that this person had decent equipment. Eurus looked at her brass knuckles and said that they were worth 10 million gold. A dumbfounded Chuck screamed that it was 10 million in real life. Watching the fight, Eurus said that all the other gear was also expensive and in total it would cost about 100 million won. The protagonist asked where she got such gear. Closing her eyes, Eurus replied that it was pay to win. Chuck was taken aback by this. He remembered Kate screaming that they didn't understand weapons at all. She looked at the brass knuckles and asked if they realized how cool her weapon was. She said with tears in her eyes that she spent so much gold on these brass knuckles. The dumbfounded protagonist thought that it was really a lot of gold, but he understood everything but to squander 100 million won on gold. Kate approached him and called out. Frowning, she said that she was dragging and asked if he would also sit and cool off and ordered him to work with his club. Chuck showed his stick and asked if he should work with this. Kate crossed her arms and replied that it was, adding that he needed to level up too, so he had to fight. She asked if he was going to scrape the bottom. The hare appeared behind her. The protagonist lightly hit the monster on the head. There was a powerful explosion. Kate turned around. She asked in surprise where the wind in the cave was coming from. Chuck thought that the concept of a loser with superpowers was starting to get on his nerves. Kate saw a red projection in front of her. She saw that something was starting in 10 minutes and she had to log out. Kate stared at the message. She sighed. She looked at the protagonist and said that she had to go out for a while. Kate disappeared and said that she would be there in half an hour, and Chuck had to practice on groups of opponents for now. Dumbfounded, the protagonist said that she had gone and disappeared. Looking at the blue sky, Chuck asked who she was in real life, noting that she had the opportunity to spend 100 million on gold. Eurus assumed that she was one of those who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. The night sky enveloped the building. The corridor was illuminated. The girl was lying on the bed. She had VR glasses on her head. She received a message that she had logged out of Chrono Life. She got up from the bed. Her face was serious. She looked at the glasses. She was sad. She remembered the moments with Chuck. A smile appeared on her face. The woman burst into her room. Frowning, she asked if Kate still had her glasses and did she want to lose her job. Furious, Kate replied that she had already taken them off. Pointing her finger, the woman said that they had less than 10 minutes and told Kate to sit down. The woman screamed and asked if Kate had put the VR helmet on over her glasses again, and she said not to do that anymore and it left dents on her nose. Adjusting her glasses, Kate said that she might have a panic attack if she took them off and there would be marks on her nose anyway because she was going to do her makeup anyway. The woman looked at her. Sighing, she said that Kate was a lot of trouble and told her to sit down already. The woman had an ominous aura. She noted that if it weren't for the size of her salary, she would have killed her long ago and then herself. She looked at the abundance of cosmetics. The woman took off Kate's glasses. Her glasses were on the table. The woman began to put on Kate's makeup. She put on lipstick. Kate took off the elastic band from her hair. There were many lights on the ceiling of the building. Bright flashes were visible. The guy thanked the people for waiting and noted that today's festival was being closed by the winner of the #1 spot in the charts for 13 weeks. There were many flashes coming from the stage. Kate was holding a guitar in her hands. The guy said that she was a popular solo idol and the best voice in the world. The people were delighted. Kate showed them a heart with her hands. She greeted everyone with a smile. She was embarrassed. Chuck remained in the cave. The plot tells us that no one knows about her hobby of online games. The monster ran towards the protagonist. Chuck looked at the hairs. Taking hold of his shoulder, the protagonist said that he would practice a little while his sensei walked away. Surprised, Eurus asked what his master was up to. Chuck grinned and noted that he needed practice to hide his superpower. The monsters pounced on him. The protagonist said that in other words, he needed to learn how to strike without killing. There was an explosion on the planet. There was a smile on the guy's face. He watched Chuck and said that it was an interesting practice. Looking at the planet, the guy said that he would try. The sun was behind him. Daylight enveloped the school. The plot tells us that Kate is 17. Daylight enveloped the school. The plot tells us that Kate is 17 years old and is in her second year of high school. People were looking at her from behind the stands. We were told that she came into the music industry as a baby and it was difficult at first and popularity passed her by. But now she is called the best idol and a singer-songwriter. Her face was on the first line of the internet. The guy was sitting next to her and said that he could not believe that she was in first place for 14 weeks. He held the microphone to his mouth and noted that he liked the sad lyrics of his hit The Story of the Little Mermaid. He asked how she manages to write such touching lines. Smiling, Kate replied that she likes being home alone and she reads poetry books and sometimes even fairy tales. The guy noted that this is where the name The Story of the Little Mermaid comes from. Kate covered her mouth with her hand and said that her manager asked her not to mention them. She, looking embarrassed, said that she was embarrassed and asked if this was a childish hobby. The guy blushed. Everyone was embarrassed. The woman was watching her on TV. The guy replied that it was not so and that it was a very interesting hobby. The woman sipped coffee. She said with a disgruntled look that Kate was deceiving the entire country and that she was cunning. Looking at the TV, she said that this was complete nonsense. She looked at the helmet and said that her hobby, which the public does not know about, is gaming. Sitting on a chair, the guy emphasized that Kate, in addition to songs, is also a successful actress and, as he heard, she had an interesting role in a drama. He asked if she was a foul-mouthed high school student. Kate had a smirk on her face. She looked at the guy and answered that it was a difficult role. Smiling, she noted that she had never sworn in her life. She remembered showing the middle finger and asking if Chuck was asking for a beating. She kicked him and asked if he was greeting his boss. Taken aback, the main character asked what boss meant and since when. Furious, Kate answered that now. She kicked Chuck and asked what the objection was and if he wanted to be coached. The plot tells us that Kate is the kind of person who relieves stress through games. Closing his eyes, Eurus told the protagonist to throw this rude woman out. Chuck tried to protect himself from the blows and replied that he was hiding his strength and had to pretend to be weak. Kate stood next to him and ordered Boss Love to repeat after him. Kate screamed that she did not hear him and asked again. Chuck screamed that she was the boss. Eurus' face was stony. He noticed that the protagonist's idea worked. They walked through the cave. Kate followed Chuck. Holding her head, Kate asked how long it took him to learn how to hunt mobs. Looking away, the protagonist said that it requires incredible patience and his journey is far from over. Displeased, Eurus asked what kind of bad tactic is fighting without killing. Chuck asked him to shut up. Kate started laughing and said that she was waiting for it. Smiling, she said that she still didn't know his name and asked what his nickname was. Chuck looked at her and asked if he had told her. Holding her head, Kate interrupted him and said that she would call him Panties. People were watching them. The man's eyes were glowing red. He said with a serious look that he had found her. The protagonist was dissatisfied. The guy approached the man and asked what they should do. The man with a serious look ordered to gather all the guild members in this dungeon. Looking at the cave, he said that today they would carry out justice. Chuck came across an angry hare. Kate looked at him. Kate pointed her finger at him and ordered to attack. The protagonist ran towards the monster. He began to scream loudly. The hare was furious. Chuck's face was dissatisfied. He began to tremble. He brought the stick to its head. He began to slowly bring the stick closer to the monster. The monster was hit. There was a dent on his head. The hare fell to the ground. Blood was flowing from his mouth. The protagonist looked at the monster and said that it was still alive. Smiling, Chuck mentally noted that fighting without killing was done. Kate cried out with a satisfied face that the protagonist had put him down with one blow and he had become strong. The dagger was flying at her. Kate was taken aback by this. She grabbed Chuck by the cloak. She dodged the dagger. There was a smirk on the man's face. There was a scratch on his face. Putting the blade back in its sheath, he declared that Kate was amazing and asked if it was thanks to her equipment. Furious, Kate asked who they were. The man crossed his arms. Smiling, he asked if she had forgotten his voice. The plot introduces us to the head of the Halasan Volcano Guild, Mr. Dave. Their names appeared above the guys. A dumbfounded Kate screamed that it was the Halasan Guild. Dave smiled and asked how long they hadn't seen each other. He pointed and asked what they were up to. The guys rushed at them. Kate turned around and told Chuck to hide behind her. She took a stance. The guys were holding their blades in their hands. Kate's face was serious. She swung her leg. She hit the warrior in the face. He spat out his tooth. She stepped on his head. She jumped up. Kate started screaming loudly. A dragon appeared behind her, after which she delivered a powerful blow. The protagonist watched the fight. He asked with a surprised look what was going on. Eurus replied that he had no idea. The protagonist looked at the carnage and said that he could only guess. He looked at Kate and said that the guys from the Halasan Guild decided to get even with love and avenge their previous losses. He looked at Dave and noted that, however, this old man does not know when to stop. Sitting to the side, Chuck stated that he was most likely right. He looked at the people on the ground and emphasized the fact that they were very weak. Eurus replied with a smile that this was true and that they had a useless fight. Dave watched the fight. he said with a satisfied look that everything was going according to plan and she was distracted. The girl rushed into battle. She found herself behind Kate. She stretched out her hand. Looking at it, Kate mentally asked if her hands were bare and if this was a fighter class. The girl used steel with a smile. A bright light illuminated the cave. Kate closed her eyes from the light. She was suddenly taken aback. She saw that the brass knuckles on her hands were gone. Holding the brass knuckles in her hands, the girl asked if this weapon was not amazing. Holding the brass knuckles, the girl asked if Kate was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Taken aback, Chuck asked what the skill was. Eurus replied that it was stealing, a thief class. He, looking surprised, said that it shouldn't be like that. Putting his hands behind his head, the protagonist asked who cared, adding that he had nothing and only had underwear and a cloak. He remembered his club. He looked at the stick. A smile was forced onto his face. He grabbed his stick. Chuck started to run away. Dave watched him and said that the guy was hanging around and could go, noting that such a newbie had nothing to steal. The girl looked at him. Chuck ran out of the cave. A smile appeared on the girl's face. She threw the brass knuckles to Dave. Turning around, she said that he didn't understand. She, with a satisfied look, said that stealing from a beggar was even more fun. She approached Chuck. She stood in front of him and asked where he was going. He stretched out his hand. She was walking towards the protagonist. Holding the stick, Chuck declared that it was not the time to hide his strength. He grabbed the club. He swung the club. He was enveloped in gusts of wind. Kate was taken aback by this. Dave watched him. Eurus was surprised. Chuck's image was visible in the clouds of dust. His hand was empty. His cloak was fluttering in the wind. The girl stood in front of him. She said with a smile that now. She hugged the club and said that now this wooden club is hers. The protagonist was dumbfounded. The brunette smiled, raising her fist, and said that later she would steal his cloak and he would only have his underwear. The girl smiled. She looked at him confused and asked what was going on. A huge dragon appeared in front of her holding a stick. He opened his eye and called her mortal, asking how she dared to touch him without even knowing who he was. The girl looked at him in fear. She fell to the ground and dropped her club. The stick rolled to Chuck's feet. The guy looked at the weapon. He picked up the stick. Taking it, a notification appeared in front of him that Eurus' soul refused to surrender to the enemy. Now he was the owner of this weapon. A dragon appeared from the stick and said that this was simply ridiculous. Eurus looked at him indignantly and asked what she was allowing herself to do. His master was only Chuck. He flew furiously next to the guy and said that she had overestimated herself. The guy stroked his head and the beast was surprised. He turned around embarrassedly at the main character. The brunette was crying with annoyance. She was lying on the ground, raising her hand. The girl clenched her teeth and thought that this had just happened. She covered her face with her hand from the fog and wondered if it was a ghost, although it was too realistic. The man behind her shouted furiously at her, asking what was wrong with her. Had she forgotten about her job? The brunette stood up and smilingly replied that no, she was a professional mercenary working for money. She looked in surprise and there was a scream. Kate kicked her in the head. The girl bared her teeth and shouted at her to give her weapon back. The rival smiled and said that she scared her, attacking her so suddenly and furiously. She stood in front of the swinging Kate and said that she was afraid. She attacked the wrong one. Her weapon was over there. The man grinned and held brass knuckles in his hands. Kate got angry and realized that they really stole them. The girl looked at her in fear and fell, saying that she would kill them. The main character hit her on the head with a baton. Chuck and the brunette stood over the girl lying on the ground. The guy raised his club and activated the skill to fight without killing. The opponent put her hands on his waist and smiled and asked what he was doing. Weren't they both on the same team? The guy looked calmly and answered that he was hiding his strength. The girl laughed and asked what he was talking about. A flame appeared behind her, lifting people into the air. She stood and smiled, and behind her lay corpses. The girl turned around in confusion. She looked at the many people on the ground. The brunette looked at him with a smile and asked if he did it. Chuck hit her with a club on the head with all his might. He looked at her angrily and said that it was him. She coughed up blood and her health bar decreased. The guy stood over the lying girl and a notification about the skill to fight without killing appeared. He watched as the girl raised her head and said that he had been through so much bad that he was stronger than her psychologically. He swung the stick. Chuck raised the stick angrily and said that now because of it he almost had a heart attack. She grinned and the club came closer. A powerful explosion occurred in the forest. Kate was lying on the grass. She turned her head and opened her eyes. The girl screamed and sat down on her knee. She turned to the guy behind the tree, who asked if she was awake. The girl looked at him in surprise. Chuck was sitting behind the tree and eating meat. She looked at the field in the forest and asked where they were, what happened to them, and he answered that they were in the field near the dungeon. They had already left. Kate looked anxiously and asked if they had left, what he was talking about. She watched the protagonist happily eat and asked why she had fainted. Kate looked in surprise at the brass knuckles in her hands. She examined the weapon. The girl happily thought that these were her brass knuckles. The guy came up and asked if it was the Hallison Guild. He looked down and asked what they were doing, who they were, and what they were doing. Kate looked at him embarrassedly. The girl bared her teeth and grabbed his cheek and asked why he decided to try on the mask of a tough guy, whether he wanted to die. She blushed and smiled. The girl went forward, saying that she would tell him since he got involved in all this because of her. She turned around, putting on her brass knuckles, and asked if he had ever heard of P2W. Chuck looked at the girl and asked what it was. He turned around confusedly to look at Eurus, who told him that P2W stood for pay to win, used in online games. The guy looked at him in surprise and asked how he even knew about it. He was just an NPC. Dragon closed his eyes and said that he read about it on NamiWiki. Eurus told the aggressive guy that people from 30 to 50 years old play this game. P2W users bring the main income to the game and are the richest among the players. The main buyers of in-game items, top P2W players pay about 30 million won a month, and the elite have 10 billion in capital. Such solvent players exist in other games as well, but P2W players think that their actions help them improve their competitiveness, somehow in addition to their gaming skills. Kate turned around and said that these are the people who spend billions on games. That's who the P2W players are. The guy was standing behind the girl and realized that the Hallison Guild were P2W players. Kate corrected the knuckle dusters and said that a few months ago, she accidentally bought these knuckle dusters at an auction, and then the Hallison Guild started chasing her to take them back. She introduced the guild leader and the rest of the people, saying that they were just old scammers with bad skills, so she comes out the winner in every skirmish. She looked at the guy confusedly and asked how he got them back. Did he manage to steal them? The guy looked at the sky and the mountains, saying that they left them and ran away. Maybe they forgot about the knuckle dusters. That's what happened. Kate closed her eyes and sighed and said that she had no idea what happened, but she was sure they would come back. That old scammer, his obsession had gone beyond all bounds. She turned to the thoughtful guy who asked if it was strange, but what was so attractive about her weapon. She looked and asked if it was obvious, because these brass knuckles cost 10 million. Chuck put his hand to his chin and said that it was strange. Old men who spent billions on the game were obsessed with a weapon that cost 10 million won. The girl looked at him in surprise. They were standing in a clearing and the main character said that this was not the reason. Night fell in the forest. The plot moves us to the house in the shelter of the Hallison Guild. Blood spattered. The man screamed and his stomach was ripped open. The king stood in front of the fallen man. The subject cried and screamed for another chance. The king looked at him silently. He frowned and told him to shut up. They were all useless. The man lay and looked at the king, who said that they had no more time. He would hand over this mission to the 4 divine kings. The man looked away in fear. 2 people entered the room and asked him why he kept the little overlord. It was cruel. He had already dealt with 3 cases. The guy stood with his arms folded with 2 people. Ron smiled and asked how this guy could be in the same league as them, the divine kings, a guy with 100 million gold. Andrew covered his mouth with his hand and smiled and said that this is why they wanted to kick out the little overlord. He only brought trouble. The elder overlord was too kind. Mike stood silently with his arms crossed. Ron sat down next to the lying man. Smiling, he said that this was a pathetic strategy. He hired a mercenary, that's why it failed. The man was angry and remembered the girl. Everyone turned to Mike, hearing that he would do it. The guy put his hand on his head, scratching his hair. He said that the brass knuckles of silence or whatever it was, he could get them in half a day. Carl laughed with his arms crossed. He laughed loudly, smiling evilly. He agreed. His net worth was 12 billion. He stood in front of Mike and told him to go and show them the true horror of the Hallison Guild. The king laughed. Mike stood calmly. Andrew licked his lips. Ron frowned and announced the start of the bloody festival. The protagonist smiled, picking his nose. Everyone turned to look at Chuck with a club. The guy with Eurus stood and looked at everyone in the room. The protagonist held his finger in his nose and laughed, saying that they were just like children, a bloody festival and the 4 divine kings. Carl turned around in surprise at the laughing guy. He looked menacingly and asked who he was and where he was from. The guy closed his eyes, picked his nose and told him to figure it out himself. He shook the booger from his nose. Chuck wiped his finger on Eurus and said that it would be hard to hide his strength if they continued to bother the boss. This time it was hard for him to pretend. He laughed again and asked if they were the 4 divine kings. The guy smirked, suggesting not to drag it out and get it over with. Carl sighed and looked at him. He got angry and called him a crazy fool. The 3 kings jumped on the guy and Carl gave the order to kill him. Ron and Andrew were flying at him, smiling. The protagonist looked at them from below. He smiled. He swung his stick. The guy hit the club and the enemies were engulfed in flames. The guys flew back in flames. The light was on in the shelter. There were blue flowers in the garden. The girl came to the garden. She walked and hummed a melody. Mike frowned and swung his claws. The girl walked and sang. The protagonist hit the guy in the stomach. He coughed up blood. The lady smiled and hummed. Chuck looked at his rival with a smile. The girl's hair was fluttering in the wind. A powerful explosion occurred in the shelter. The girl looked in surprise at the house in front of her. She opened her mouth. The lady smiled calmly. She smiled shyly and looked into the distance. The girl